his constituents. So I'll go ahead and call the September 8th, 2025 Housing Planning Development Committee meeting to order. Without objection, I'll call, or I guess I'll ask for I'll make a motion to approve the June 23rd, 2025 Housing Planning Development Committee meeting minutes. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. So moved. Then, Assistant Director Boss, are you ready for the transit? You know what, let's, so I'll go ahead and give Assistant Director Boss a moment to gather his breath. The boys on the football team are 2-1, so we're proud of them. It's good work out there. And we'll go ahead into Ordinance 18-2025, which is kind of about front yard plantings. So I don't think we'll be in a position this evening. It's not my intention to pass this. It is merely to take more public comment, absorb a little bit more of kind of the intention behind what we're seeking to do in conjunction with the building department, and Commissioner Parmalee is here. So this was introduced in May, and we also got a correspondence from Keep Liquid Beautiful today. They would like a little bit more time to review this, and certainly if there's anything formal we need to do as a committee to ask them to review it or just solicit their input would be helpful. So as introduced, the ordinance essentially called for a buffer area, but allowed for natural plantings in the front yard. There was some kind of areas that in our last committee meeting when we discussed this, we dug into, which are some of the buffers, how we wanted to, and the tension we had is, a lot of these types of plantings and managed landscapes are already occurring in our city, so how can we encourage that amongst our residents that are doing that and really faithful about it, but also give the building department tools to cite property owners that are not maintaining and managing their properties. So that, just like everything else we do on council, those are some of the policy kind of issues we have to dig into. So I sent out, and it's up on the screen here, some edits, and I can go through them, and I'm not controlling the computer, but Maureen, if you can, or Danielle, I don't know who's controlling it. As you dig down into the section, which I don't know what page it's on, it's in front of us, but the intention was to clean up some of the definitions. If you put track changes on, you could see the changes. The main thing that I changed as we go through them and welcome public input, and then even my colleagues can sit with it and we can schedule another meeting, was I moved back some of the buffers. So as proposed by the administration, it was a 4-foot setback from the right-of-way and a 4-foot setback from the property line. And then there was a 2-foot setback from driveways. So and this is all up for discussion. I do know that from a building code perspective, I think we need to be 18 inches off the property line and have a firewall. Is that correct, Commissioner Parmalee? Or for garages, right? You need to be 18 inches off the property line? But you can do it with I did it, and you guys approved it, so I thought, okay. Yes. Yes, and so so I kind of, when I was at least drafting these, and I know an average mower width's about 20 to 24 inches. So the intention here is that this code provision would affirmatively allow naturally managed landscapes. And that they're defined in the proposed ordinance. It's not just let your grass grow. It's some other function of having native grasses, other things that is a managed landscape. But then essentially the building department would have a little bit more ability within these buffer zones to cite for safety issues. Now, our code already has some or some ability for the planning or for the housing department to cite for these issues. One of which is Code Section 177501B, which I believe says that if pedestrian sightlines or motorist sightlines are obstructed and the plants are over 30 inches, 36 inches, then the building department can cite. And then secondarily, there's 177502, which says that if the plants are literally impeding the public right-of-way, so say hanging over and stopping people from being able to walk along the sidewalk, then the building department could cite.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair. Can we ask the administration put the microphones on? Chris, I don't know if your mic is on to capture for the audience and the record. Thanks. Request for larger type. Thanks.
Yeah. And we, to be clear to the folks listening at home and in the audience, we don't intend to pass this evening. This is simply for discussion purposes. At least I don't intend as chair to refer this out of committee this evening. But we figured it was a good check-in point. So as you'll see within, the only things I really changed were narrowing the setbacks from 4 feet to 2 feet on the side property line, and then keeping 2 feet along the driveway as well, because that's essentially a lawnmower width. And then I cited back to the provisions that say the sidewalk cannot be obstructed by these plantings, and that if the plants are over 36 inches tall and obscure motorist sightlines or pedestrian sightlines for safety reasons, then they can be cited. So it's changed the intent a little bit of this ordinance to allowing naturally managed landscapes and then referring back to other parts of the code that are intended to keep people that walk and drive and everyone else safe in Lakewood. That's just the way I've proposed it for discussion at this committee and for the public to provide input on. Welcome my colleagues' thoughts on this, or the administration's. I sent it on Saturday.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly in agreement with lessening these setbacks. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm still a little concerned about folks who are already maintaining these gardens in the city and how that's going to affect them. But I'm very happy to hear discussion from folks, and also obviously want to hear from the building department as well. But thanks for having a conversation this evening about this, and I agree not in a hurry to rush this through. I think we have a lot more to hear, so thanks for that.
Councilman Bullock.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your work on this. Okay, just want to make sure that's working. So I appreciate the point that the proposed ordinance would create an affirmative ability to grow and maintain managed natural landscapes, which doesn't exist, I think, today. Is that an accurate statement from your perspective, law department or building department?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so this is a step forward in a constructive sense. There's some detail to continue working through to develop some consensus and also get workability around it. But I'd be happy, Mr. Chair, to make a motion to adopt as a substitute the version that you prepared tonight as a potential checkpoint in our deliberations. In other words, make this the new baseline. If you think a motion is what you're interested in tonight. But that's maybe towards the end of the discussion. I'd certainly welcome the chance for some of the members of the public and Keep Lakewood Beautiful to be able to share their thoughts.
Yeah, and does the building department or the law department, I didn't have a ton of time to review, so I apologize, but you had today. So curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah, I didn't have a whole lot of time. I tried carving some time out today, being Monday. But so with trimming that setback down, so we're taking the interior lots and the corner lots, giving them the same side yard setbacks. It's kind of the plan.
Yes, I mean, and the challenge is that so the current code, and this is where, and if you look at a lot of and this is the challenge, right? We have the lived environment. You have some people that are managing their properties really well, and their growth would be over 5 inches, even though it's a naturally managed landscape. And so I think at that point, rather than just bringing a ruler and saying you're over 5 inches, cut it down, that there's some determination about whether or not it's actually obstructing sight for motorists or pedestrians. And I understand that probably not exactly what your property management inspectors want to hear, but I do think we need to have some flexibility. But that's just what I was struggling with, so I welcome any more input to kind of help develop that.
Yeah, the only reason I came up with that 4 foot, 8 foot on the corner lots is just those main intersections, especially Franklin. That I think if we're, 2 foot, 2 foot, and then 4 foot on the corner, that's something we'd have to take a look at, because there's quite a few properties I could think of down Franklin that, I mean, you're in the middle of the crosswalk. When it gets to be a little later in the season and the stuff really starts taking off. But obviously open to discussion. I mean, that's why we're here, and there's no expectation of this thing getting passed anytime soon. And I actually see this rolling out probably first quarter of next year by the time we get it dialed in, because I'm not a fan of trying to enforce new ordinances, at the tail end of the season. We need to be able to get the communication out there, get emails out to people, get stuff on the website, so.
So your main concern is the corner lot setback?
It's the corner lots, and it's not just, Franklin, it's everywhere Lakewood. But then you can have the argument, well, we have giant commercial buildings that have zero setback that are all the way up to the sidewalk, and we can't move that, but plantings are a little less permanent in nature than structures, and I think moving forward, we can make a good plan that fits the city and the residents kind of as a whole. Just get rid of the guesswork is what I'm looking for. A little more consistency when it comes to enforcement, because it's already a tough job. So
There's a lot of notices that went out for high bushes on corners. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if somebody got a correction notice and started traveling the city. That's usually what happens. But.
Councilperson Keppel?
Thanks. You could see me having questions. Okay, so I had a question about where we get, why, I saw it was 5 inches in height and now 6 inches, but is that based on something specific? I know that previously the code was 6 inches for grass. Is that where
That's
that
why it
comes from?
changed, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I wanted to keep it consistent with the rest of the code about tall grass, which is 6 inches.
okay. And is that because if grass is more than 6 inches, it's looking messy? Or is it based on 6 inches is when we start to get into problems with sightlines?
No, it's got nothing to do with sightlines. That's just a high grass ordinance.
So, thank you. So the reason I'm asking that is, so if we're saying, we could have two different things potentially of, if we're talking about in section 4 there, so turf grass, lawn, not exceeding 6 inches, because we still don't want unkept turf grass.
Right.
But you could have 8-inch flowers that aren't preventing sightlines.
So that's the intention of the way I drafted it. So
Okay.
the intention is that the setback from the public right-of-way shall be comprised of either regular turf grass lawn that is not taller than 6 inches or low-grow vegetation, or and I should have capitalized these, managed natural landscape, meadow vegetation, or ornamental plants, which refers back to the definition of those things earlier in the code, or in the proposed ordinance. And then they have to be compliant with these two code sections, which are, one, that it be under 36 inches in height and not, above 36 inches of height and obstruct pedestrian or or pedestrian sightlines, motorist or pedestrian sightlines, or overhang over the right-of-way. So I tried to give it more flexibility. That was my intention in drafting it, at least.
Thank you, that makes sense.
And one of the main reasons for that setback too, it's the handlebar catcher for bikes. So that's why when we have the fences on corner lots that are 42 inches in height, they need to be a foot off the sidewalk. So just keep it lower, closer to the sidewalk so people can get by. That's the intent.
Is there any public comment on, and we will, so to the folks in the audience who are listening at home, email us as well. Obviously, we understand that you just saw this tonight. We don't intend to pass this evening, so we welcome any input that folks have, whether it's this evening or via email, and we will have another committee hearing about it, and you're all welcome to come. Is there any public comment? Yeah, if you'd like to make public comment, it looks like we have some people signed in. Just come up to the mic, say your name and address, and if you're comfortable, and then please provide your public comment. How you doing? Push the button.
Green. Okay. Hi, I'm Allison Welch, 1656 Orchard Grove. So I just want to clarify because it's a little bit wonky and maybe just because of the red and stuff. But okay, for the setback there, it looks like I heard you say that the 6 inches is for the turf grass or ground cover, right? But the 6 inches is not part of the managed natural landscape meadow, all that, correct?
Yes, so, and perhaps we can be clear, because I sometimes write like a lawyer, because I read like a lawyer, and maybe average people, can't understand it. But the intention is that within the setback area, which you define as 2 feet or 4 feet or 6 feet, there's, we need to work with the building department on that, the new level is 36 inches.
Okay.
And it obstructs something.
Okay.
Sight lines. So that's the intention, is that technically it could be over 36 inches as long as,
It's not obstructing something.
yeah, as long as pedestrians can see and people can navigate the area. That's the intention of what's drafted, at least.
So I think that's the part that I'm not reading well on there, but that's okay. That's good to know that that's the intention, because that sounds like what we were trying to figure out. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you. And I've Agnes McCallick. Yeah, you can all come up together. It's pretty informal if you. There'll be another committee hearing too if you'd like to provide comments.
Agnes Michalak, 1459 Rockway. So I have a ton of questions. I am also not opposed to asking them from a KLB point of view at a later time as a discussion to kind of understand the background. My first question is regarding the tree lawn. So if we go to the figure, I'm missing that piece of the puzzle. I know that from my own perspective and some of my neighbors, we would like to know what the intention of this is with enforcing things on the tree lawn and those sight lines and that.
So I can answer that. The building department's jurisdiction starts at the edge of the sidewalk. So the entirety of this ordinance deals with the sidewalk back to your home. The area from the sidewalk to the street, including the tree lawn, is regulated differently by the Public Works Department, and this ordinance wouldn't really affect that.
Mr. Chair, to interject, though, I think that is pertinent. I'd love to hear what the law director's answer, Assistant Law Director Swallow's answer to that question might be. But also, if we come up with a system or a standard that works well for the private yard, there may be tie-ins or we could figure out how to extend the same principles, at least partly, to the tree lawn. And I do think residents are viewing the tree lawn as an important part of their potential plantable area, correctly or incorrectly. That's just the common sense impact. And I was talking to somebody literally yesterday about that. They're like, well, we don't have a tree here, and we're thinking of what we can do on the tree lawn. So I think that's a common sense thought by many Lakewood residents, whether it should be or not. And so probably one of the outcomes of all of this might be, once we settle upon some workable standard, we do some public education with people. Here's the, here's the rules of the road on this section, here's the rules of the road on that section. Sorry for the long-winded thought, but Assistant Director Swallow, what's the?
So the tree lawn area is considered part of the public right-of-way. We do have an ordinance that prohibits placing anything in the public right-of-way. It's not something that we regularly police, but if there is a complaint, excuse me, about, plantings or something in the public right-of-way, we may address that. We would go out and take a look at it and be like, okay, well, somebody planted flowers around the base of a tree and it's not obstructing any views, and, not take any action in a situation like that. But if it were something that were obstructing the public right-of-way, then we would notify the homeowner that they needed to remove that. And again, when I look at this and I think about this, and I also want to run the setbacks by public safety just to make sure that it's something that they're comfortable with, so that we do have an objective standard rather than having a subjective standard where, who decides what's obstructing the public right-of-way. But when I look at these figures, and we were very clear that we needed figures to help people guide them through what we're trying to do here, if you allow higher growth on the tree lawn, it's adding an additional obstruction. So if you have a kid on a big wheel that's flying down the sidewalk and a vehicle is trying to make a turn into one of those driveways, you want to make sure that that small child that's low to the ground is going to be visible, and, not end up getting hit because the growth was too tall for the driver to see.
Do they have big wheels still?
My kids did. It actually almost happened to one of my kids, but it wasn't due to overgrowth. It was a distracted driver.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway for folks is that the tree lawn is not yours. You have the responsibility to maintain it. But if you spend a lot of money managing the landscape there, the gas company can come tomorrow and rip it up to put a gas line in, or the city could come and use it for, right-of-way work. So that's the message. But to answer your question, the intent of this ordinance is sidewalk back.
Understood. I do think there is a lot of confusion there for people because, as you just said, it's our responsibility to maintain it, but we don't get to decide. So I think that the way that some of this is written in reference to those tree lawns might not be as clear, and that I don't know that this would solve any of that, but just for future reference when reviewing any of that, it is not as clear as it could be of what you can and can't do in an average person speak, if you will. So thank you for that. I appreciate your explanation. And let's see here. I think you mentioned something about subjectivity. So my question is, who decides what is a managed native natural landscape? What components go into that? Because I can venture a guess that what I assume to be an 8-inch native flower, you might decide is not, and it's a weed. So I think that when we start to talk about native plantings, things like that, that there's a really big difference between opinions on what that is. And one of my problems with the language in here is the individual that solely gets to decide what that might be. And where some of these noxious weeds list comes from, I do know that the state of Ohio has a very extensive one, whereas this one is limited to, I think, 32, so having some more information on that aspect of things would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that you're venturing into the area that we're trying to provide some guidance to the building department on, because our property maintenance inspectors are going out to, 300 or 400 of these, kind of complaints every summer, and they're trying their best to, serve the residents, but also make sure that they're enforcing the code. So I think that's what we're struggling with, to be honest with you, and why we're not trying to do this too quickly and take input and figure out a better way to do it, so that it's something that residents can live with and the property maintenance inspectors can do their jobs.
And I think part of our sustainability plan, right, is to identify that stuff. So I think that separate from Agnes standing here. Now Agnes with her board hat on for KLB would be more than happy to help identify some of those things and help navigate that from an education point of view, as for everybody, not just us here or public safety, just really the community in general.
Mr. Chair, can I respond to that as well? So the list that is in the code has been there for as long as I have been, which is a very, very long time. At one point, Keep Lakewood Beautiful did make some recommendations to cleaning that up and removing, like I believe it used to have milkweed in it years ago, and we removed that for obvious reasons. So we're definitely open to recommendations and, you know.
At least a dozen off the top of my head.
Okay.
We can absolutely do that. And in comparison to what is the standard for Ohio, Ohio State Extension has a lot of really great information as
Right.
well.
And if it's not something that's listed as prohibited, then it's going to be permitted.
Right.
So to kind of help better answer that.
Thank you, appreciate that. I think that is the majority of the big ticket items for me. Is there anything? No? You're good? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, real fast. Thank you. So Agnes and Keep Lakewood Beautiful, first of all, thanks for being here. Secondly, I think we should rely on your expertise both on the detailed listings of noxious weeds, for example, but also on how to work with the general public and get the word out there about the do's and the don'ts. My experience with the code is that it's been written over 100 years. Some sections have been on the books for many, many decades, and they don't necessarily get updated on a regular basis. Actually, Assistant Director Swallow has been quite good about periodically updating portions, but that doesn't mean we do everything constantly. So if you're noticing that the state law has more up-to-date industry standards, then we certainly welcome that feedback. That together we'll, we can consider that for an update. I do want to convey to the city a couple thoughts from having talked to some of the people in the audience and others in the public. Especially rain gardens, especially native plants that have an evolved root system, they take years to establish. So we'll have people who have invested a lot of money and years and care into growing under the existing rules. And if we change the standards, then all of a sudden we're literally going to take a haircut to their tree lawn, or not their tree lawn, their front yard garden investment. So to me, that's a factor that we should think of and respect. We grandfather in a lot of things in all kinds of places in the code. I'm not sure what the right solution is here, but there's people who've put a lot of effort and care into their front yard plantings that should, I think, be a factor in our thinking. Also, I think Agnes's point, Agnes, I'm calling you by your first name because I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Made a good point. We've got the city has a sustainability and a climate action plan. It calls for certain things when it comes to, carbon mitigation, and I know the red lines call that out too. So we sometimes have one foot on the accelerator, one foot on the brakes in our city policies. That's because we're doing a lot of things, right? And so there are reasons why we want to encourage people to do this for stormwater management, et cetera, right? So we've been encouraging people to make this investment. Now we're going to potentially tell them they have to restrict or confine or rip up what they've done. So that's something we're going to have to carefully balance too.
Well, I mean, just like anything else, right? So if you have a commercial building that was built in 1905 and we had no accessibility standards in 1905. Existing is allowed to exist, right? Until it becomes a safety issue. So if that building built in 1906 has come to disrepair and they need to rip the common bathrooms out of the hallway, well, now you have to meet the intent of the new code. So, I mean, code enforcement's a lot of give and take, and I want the public to hear from me that, I am not an expert in thistle and milkweed. I mean, that's not where my profession came from. Majority of my staff, we are public safety, building safety, we're building people, we're code people, and this kind of started, a couple of years ago with the No Mow May thing and talking to the administration. We have to do something besides letting people grow their grass to, 8, 10, 12 inches for a month and then have to play catch up. So that's when the front yard planning started coming into play, front yard gardens. I mean, we have houses on our street that plant vegetables and stuff in the front yard. I mean, we don't have a lot of real estate. We're Lakewood, Ohio. So between Keep Lakewood Beautiful, public comment, what we talk about, I mean, it's, common sense isn't so common, especially in local government. We all know that. So whatever we come to is fine in my eyes, as long as we have just those adequate buffer zones. I mean, safety's paramount, we know that. I just want to be able to see when I'm pulling out on a main thoroughfare or the neighbor's backing out of their driveway. I just want to make sure that, if somebody's got their phone to their face jogging down the sidewalk, they're not going to see anything. But I want to make sure that we have clear line of sight on corner lots and liner lots, because when you have 8 million, 48 by 140 lots, we're really, really tight. And it's a combination, and people aren't really paying attention to what they're doing anymore. And if we can open up that line of sight, I have nothing against wild plantings or, growing corn in your front yard for that matter. It's just the simple fact that I'm a property rights guy. People should be able to do what they want on their own parcel of land within reason, right? I just want to make sure the general public's safe out there while they're out walking around, walking the dog, or taking the kids for a walk. So that's why we're here. That's why we're doing what we're doing. To me, it's less of what's planted in the yard and more of, because you're exactly right, like, I like manicured grass, but not everybody does. People need to be able to plant what they want to plant in their front yard, and I couldn't tell you the difference between water hemp and Russian thistle, but I can tell you where sprinkler systems are required in commercial buildings, because that's the world I live in. But if we can meet to some middle ground and focus on the line of sight, so we don't have things growing over the sidewalk, so people could see where they're backing out or pulling into their driveway, and we have a common sense approach when it comes to this ordinance, I mean, I'm all in.
Yeah, I think we'll get there. So I am interested in, I can work with the clerk to have this updated version. The figures aren't updated, sent to KLB so that they're aware of it and you all can provide comments. And like the commissioner said, and I think at least me as chair of this committee, we're on the same page that this is about something rolling out in next year, right? So we want to take the time now to get it right. Because there's going to be a public education component to it as well. I think about when we banned vaping in parks, it was just as much a code issue as it was letting people know that you can't do this in parks. So I think that's a really good process, and I appreciate, that's what's great about Lakewood is we all come together and try to figure out the solution that works for City Hall staff and our residents in a way that we can have efficient government. That's what it should be. So on that, I'll guess we'll just leave this on the docket unless there's any more comments from folks. President Keppel.
I was just going to make a quick comment that when we do reach a solution, it might be a great opportunity for maybe Keep Lakewood Beautiful to work with a public information officer from the city and do some maybe educational videos about what to plant, why you would want to plant that, and how to plant it safely based on this new code. So it could be a good opportunity to educate people about the benefits of natural planting as well as how to do it safely and legally. So just a thought that we could work on.
Yeah, I think it's just as much about code as it is about kind of public information and education. Pardon? Yeah, you want to.
Okay. Mr. President or Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we substitute or amend with a substitute, making use of the red line that you've shared with the committee prior to the meeting. I think all of us have a copy.
Yeah, I'll second that. And I'll just note that even if we went with that, we would need to update the figures, so we still have work to do. So The motion, it's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the ordinance has been substituted, but it's still going to stay in committee. The next docket item is communication from Director Byington regarding a transit feasibility study. I'll let Assistant Director Boss, he has a presentation to provide for us. I remember as a kid, the community circulator in Lakewood, I saw the dates. It was interesting. It was 98 to 2009 or something like that. So right when I started high school. So I'll throw it over to Assistant Director Boss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can go through this and stop for questions or whenever we need to, if that works. But just a couple disclaimers up front. This has been over a year plus since we finished this transit study. This was conducted predominantly in late 23 through 2024. It really finished up in like May, June of 2024. So it has been some time since this study was completed. It was done by Iteris. So former Director Leininger and I worked with Iteris on this. So I'm going to do my best to cover some of the questions I may. If you have questions I can't answer, I will come back and answer them, or I can follow up with email. Because some of this stuff does get, as we get into the alternative comparison, some of it is pretty technical in terms of cost estimates and a lot of those, the different data points. But I'll try to highlight kind of the most germane things as we move through here. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So just in terms of background, everybody loves the circulator. It does come up in almost any venue that we reach out to or have any kind of form of public discussion. It's a great service. It only unfortunately lasted for just a little over 10 years. So RTA started their community circulators, and there were several of them. I think over time they kind of phased them in. At the 804 Lakewood, I do believe it did have the highest ridership of all of the community circulators, and it was the last one to get phased out. But ultimately, as the city then found out in 2010, based on demand, public input, the city administration at the time signed a contract and fronted a fair amount of money with to come up with a shopper shuttle. And so we kind of tried to pilot our own service that was kind of a hybrid between the city and RTA in terms of operations. And it lasted about a year until it just became too expensive based on low ridership. I think they averaged, and there's not a ton of data on this. I had to go back and dig up a lot of it through reporting at the time. I believe the numbers were somewhere around 12 riders a day, which is just not sustainable and you'll start to see as we get through this, just how much these systems cost to run. And ultimately that's kind of what put a stake in it for RTA. And that's what ultimately in April of 2011, the administration, the mayor decided that it was just not financially feasible to continue moving forward with our own system, a fixed route system, which is what it was designed to be. I think everybody's familiar with our current regional service that we have with RTA.
Mr. Chair, quick interjection.
Yes.
Dave, the hours for that year experiment with Lakewood Shopper Shuttle was, do you know if it was a full day, half day? I don't recall myself.
I don't know. I don't have a lot of data on it. I can look at I can get you that answer, as I'm sure it's in the contract. I know the intent was to try to mirror that Lakewood circulator, which was
my recollection too. Yeah,
it was like an 8 or a 12-hour service, kind of fixed route.
You could do anything, whereas there's some arguments that it could be a targeted evening or a special event or some other scenario. But
We'll get into a lot of
Yeah,
that in terms
okay,
of the different
thank you.
options that are out there, but yeah, it was trying to mirror that circulator service. So I'm going to go through basically 4 different parts. This is the first part of the background, and really the first part of the study tried to identify kind of the need and the benefits that are out there for having a local transit system. It started with a transit needs survey that went out to the public in April of 2024. 5 pretty straightforward questions. We got over 500 responses, which was pretty good for a survey here in Lakewood. And those are the 5 questions. So it was kind of really, how do you travel versus how would you like to travel? And a lot of open-ended questions and comments. And the survey or the report actually has all of the comments in the back of one of the appendices. You can read through everybody's comments that are there. So if you go to the next slide, please, I'll just review hit the highlights of the different questions. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I know these might be a little hard to read in the back, but these are the first 3 questions. Working top left to bottom right. First question asked, how do you travel for trips within Lakewood? Select all that apply. So this allowed people multiple responses. So obviously the percentages add up to nothing that makes sense because people were directed to select all that apply. Top response was walking. And of note that riding the bus and using existing local transit, which we do have, and I'll talk a little bit about Senior Transportation Connection, a little bit down towards the bottom with 22% and 4%. About 35% of the respondents had 2 or fewer modes of travel that they indicated. About 70% was 3 or fewer modes, and the majority of the people answered, or well over the majority, 90% of the people that answered indicated 4 of those modes. So a lot of people selected most of them. Small percentage of people only indicated 1 mode, and those that did indicate 1 mode, 3/4 of them just said a car or carpooling, and I think that's probably no surprise to anybody. Only 3% said RTA transit was their only mode of travel. And so that starts to give you a picture that is probably not a big surprise to folks. But question 2 talks about how do you want to travel for trips in Lakewood? And so there was a ranking of 1 to 10 in terms of the preference. They all you get 550 people, everybody starts to shoot on that target, and it all averages out at some point, but 44% of people ranked riding the bus as one of their top 3. Driving a car was right about 50%. So there is, despite the low numbers of actual travel, there is some demand in Lakewood. I don't think that's a surprise. And then so question 3 asked what were the challenges of using public transportation, and the top 2, it should be no surprise to anybody, is that buses don't come frequently enough and buses don't go where I want to go. And that was, if anybody remembers the huge RTA study like 2 years ago, those were the 2 options that they worked with, is do you want reach or do you want frequency? And that's something that RTA as a regional system wrestles with every day. If you go to the next slide, please. This lists, and that's a laundry list but this was the most popular destinations that people listed in the survey. That obviously you ask people their question 4, where do you want to travel to? We got tons of different responses, and these were the most popular. So 451 out of 550 people said Lakewood Park. 359 out of 550 said the public library. And then you get into some of the grocery stores at Marks Plaza, Giant Eagle, and then a lot of the retail and some of the other park and entertainment venues and schools and things as you work your way down through here. And so this gives some kind of demand, a little bit of indication of public source demand, although it's self-selected public survey, but you start to see some of that piece. And then the last question there, the transit service preference, you can see
There's a
that.
question from President Couple.
Yeah.
Sorry, I would just be curious to compare this list to where RTA currently stops. So sometimes, and also on the previous slide, it's hard to, based on your preferred means of travel, if the bus doesn't go where you want it to go, then it's not your preferred means of travel. And the same thing here, it's kind of hard to envision.
So it's a reasonably confident estimate.
It's the industry practice, best practice,
Their
standard.
core data comes from where?
Comes from nationwide.
Do they put a box in somebody's car, or they make them sign a survey, or?
Yeah, I don't know how ITE does it, but that is the accepted
So according to
standard.
this, the number
Yeah.
1 restaurant in town is Breadsmith.
So we didn't bring in any additional locations. All the locations came from the public survey. That's the difference between the top and the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's,
Thank you.
yeah, so what they tried to do was they tried to take all the input from the public input on these are the locations that we want to go. And then they applied the ITE trip generation data to try to get some kind of an idea as to
see.
how many people would be going there every day.
So the point
on a
is not
transit
what's on
system.
the list and where it's ranked, but rather the comparison between the middle and the right-hand column.
Yeah, so you get some size differences, and so RTA is actual data on the bottom. The
Got it.
top would be, it's the difference in terms of, like, where do you want to go versus where you are going, if that makes sense. It's not always Lakewood residents that are riding the RTA. There's people coming in. So keep that in mind also, that the top should be just a inward-looking survey of Lakewood residents.
Okay, and so I'll be quiet after this. So the point would be, on the top map, the big red square on the left is not matched by a comparative green circle in the bottom.
So
That's our
it's-
opportunity.
It could be interpreted as being more important to Lakewood residents than actual RTA users right now.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Now I follow. Thank you.
Lakewood residents love Brett Smith.
They do. They love their Bread Smith.
Want
yeah.
to be able
Non-Lakewood
to,
residents as well.
So, I mean, ITERIS does these pretty routinely, these transit studies, but it's not easy always to get your arms around, like, designing a system that's going to be, looked upon favorably. And that's that challenge of, does it reach, or does it go to the places you want to go? And then we'll get into frequency too, because that's a whole other thing. If you go to the next slide. So as we started then, as part 3, starting to look at, the different aspects of, kind of contemporary aspects of transit and transportation services. There's some definitions in there. I don't have to go through all of these, but these were some of the demand responsive system is kind of the newer way of smaller, mid to small transit systems, not always in dense kind of rectilinear communities like Lakewood is, but think of like suburban Columbus, Ohio, where it's kind of a post-50s development, not all, like you got a lot of cul-de-sacs and curved roads and stuff like that, and so it's harder for a fixed route system to be adapted to efficiently to a community like Dublin, Ohio, that's 30,000 people in an area probably 10 times the size of Lakewood. And so trying to adapt some kind of a transit system for that population, it's challenging. And so a demand responsive system, it's what we do for human services right now for the senior transportation connector. You have to request the ride, all those types of things. And so then the route basically is created every day based on who signed up for a ride. They say it's a demand response system works in those less dense, larger areas, but for a dense area, they readily admit that it is less productive and efficient than a fixed route system in a smaller area where people generally can walk that last mile to the route rather than having you go pick up everybody and kind of try to do that every day. So I think you know what a fixed route system is. That's what RTA operates right now. Paratransit has its own kind of things that it carries with it because most fixed route and even on-demand systems don't always have the equipment, the ADA compliant equipment to do that. Microtransit, that's basically the new demand responsive system. It's a multi-passenger system, and there's companies that do this now, but it's a dynamically centered or run kind of routes. So it's based on who signs up for the day. Some algorithm or a computer AI bot creates the most efficient route to pick up and drop off all those people based on their origin and destinations that they've requested, and so that's that microtransit. Ride sourcing is simply, it's more single passenger, which is pretty common these days. And they talk about contracted services just because that is the direction that a lot of municipalities are going. They're finding it far more cost efficient and cheaper to contract someone to run it than for us to own everything and manage it from a fleet perspective and an operator perspective. So we looked at the ITERIS and we looked at 5 systems that were basically kind of met a lot of these different things. RTA obviously is a fixed route system. STC is a more of an on-demand contract style system. And that's what we do with the City of Lakewood. STC provides the drivers. So City of Lakewood, ours is more of a hybrid. We own the equipment, those little minibuses, and STC provides the drivers for that. Share mobility, that's one of those micro-transit systems that's in Dublin, Ohio, that I referenced. You have to make your reservations 2 hours in advance, and then it like constantly updates its dynamic routing based on location and stuff, but it is an app-based system that I don't know, based on the survey, 30% of people would be okay with that, or 20% or whatever. It was a low number. And then VIA is another one of those on-demand kind of micro-transit systems. VIA is used a little bit bigger. It's in Columbus and Toledo, and it kind of fills in the gaps between their larger fixed route systems that are out there. Go to the next slide, please. So based on that data, the destination data from the surveys and the everything, so they came up with a couple of different route options to test. And so after kind of going through these and thinking through them a little bit, we decided to move forward with just the two that are on the left and the bottom. So you have a Madison-Detroit loop, and then you have a extended Madison and Detroit loop. The Gold Coast connection was way too inefficient when they started modeling it, and so we just kind of dropped it because it obviously doesn't hit a majority of the locations. But these were two that were fairly similar to the connector, to the circulator of years gone by, but addressed the survey responses, the ITE trip generation, and some other things that allow us then to kind of test it and develop and show some alternatives that you can actually get some data to look at and kind of compare. If you go to the next slide, please. So then you've got all kinds of variables that you have to kind of accept, control, assumptions that you make when you put these models together. So is it an 8-hour day, a 12-hour day, a 14-hour day? Is it going to operate 5 days a week or 6 days a week? And so the majority of, and when we get into the alternatives, they looked at an 8-hour and a 14-hour model, and every single one of them were 6-day services. We figured that was just based on the survey results. The 6-day service was what would be the most popular. And then for the other factors that are built in there, there's pricing is probably the biggest one. But as you go through the assumptions that had to be made, so we picked the Madison-Detroit loop and then that extended loop were the two models that we really went forward with. For forecasting, Iteris had access to this, it's the Federal Transit Authority STOPS model. It provides projected ridership numbers for modeling, and so based on the usage, the size, the ITE trip generation numbers, it provides kind of a forecasted throughput for the system so that you can get some kind of data on ridership. How frequently is that service stopping? That's your headway. So is a bus there every 20 minutes, every 30 minutes, every 40 minutes? That has significant implications in terms of equipment and operator demand. How much are you charging? So they use the RTA senior and RTA standard routes just as a base point. And then really that helps you develop kind of operating, startup, and annual management costs. There were some externalities that they also looked at to try to kind of some cost benefit savings of externalities, like how many riders, rider behavior and diversion, how many cars are you going to take off the road? Because that'll save on congestion, noise, CO2 emissions, all those types of things. They tried to look at some of those other savings.
Parking spaces?
Potential, that's part of the congestion, yeah, all of those things. And so if you go to the next slide, it's an eye chart. But there were there were 6 basically alternatives that were studied in detail. And so as you kind of work, 3 of them were fixed route, 3 of them were on demand. And so just kind of from the top bar, they're working left to right. So the first alternative was a city-owned and operated fixed route system. The next one over would be a contractor-owned and operated fixed route system. And then the third one would be if we contracted with RTA to run a fixed route system, like basically paying RTA to bring the circulator back. The fourth one is now an on-demand system, and that is using Senior Transportation Connection. So an existing company to run an on-demand system. The fifth one would be to go out, basically go to the market, try to find another contractor, like a VIA or one of those, the other one that I highlighted that's already in use in other communities, to see if we could bring them here to fill in those gaps for the fixed route systems. And then the last would be a hybrid system, so like some city aspects of it and then a contracted aspects of it as well to try to save some costs. So as you kind of work your way down in terms of, they kind of broke these down on, now I'm going on the left side from top to bottom. So some metrics for user experience, is there a schedule in effect that people can follow that's easier to follow? Do people have to reserve the rides in advance? How are those stops covered? Administration, who's got the insurance, who's hiring drivers, who's doing scheduling and management of the system, who owns the vehicles, who's doing the maintenance on the vehicles. And then the ridership. So this is where a lot of the FTA stop data comes in for anticipated boardings, ridership, annual miles, auto trips reduced per day. And then you get into the cost. So there's capital costs. We assume those capital costs for every 10 years based on general life cycle of a bus or similar equipment. What's the annual operations cost? You're talking like paying drivers, paying management, maintenance, all of those things that goes into that type of a system. And then how much revenue do you actually get out of that ridership based on, and that was using the RTA senior rate and standard rate. I think $1.25 and $2.50 per ride. The annual auto cost reduction, external benefits, those I am not as clear on, and so I apologize for that. You're getting into the externalities there of some of those, trying to quantify, fiscally quantify some of those savings. But when you start talking about cost-benefit analysis, you want that to be at 1 or higher if you're looking for a profitable system. And so none of these systems are profitable, unfortunately. I mean, that's just kind of the hard math of it. And so you can go across here and really, if you wanted to hone in on anything, really in terms of cost versus revenue, it's the capital and operations added together versus fair revenue. And so for your daily boardings and your annual ridership, nothing really, the fixed route, as it was talked about in a dense area like Lakewood, is a little more efficient, so you get some of those numbers that potentially could go up to $68,000 a year, vice like $43,000 a year on the low end. And so boardings are higher. That on-demand system, it's a little more jumpy in Lakewood, so it's a little lower. But you can see definitely the difference between, like, if the city owned it, $1.3 to $2.5 million every 10 years for capital, $1.1 million to $3.7 million every year for operations, versus $100 to $190,000 a year is what you're making on fares. Significant difference. What they highlighted, really, their recommendation that kind of came out of this whole thing, just being conscious of time, and I've been going for a while. They did recommend, if we did want to move forward with some form of local transit, that the city look at an on-demand contracted system, which is basically what we have with Human Services and Senior Transportation Connection. It is the most efficient, lowest cost, kind of lowest risk for the city in terms of the insurance, the operations, all those types of things. And I think that's the reason why that STC and Human Services, even at a lower level that it is, and the very specific kind of populations that it serves, it's been successful. It's at least been sustained. But I do believe for a fixed route system, the city would likely have to contract with someone or look to enter in a partnership with RTA. And that's just, the operations cost alone is significantly higher than a contracted on-demand system. And even RTA was not forthcoming with a lot of information on how much that would cost in terms of capital, and so that's why the big varies on there. And so I don't mean to paint like a super dire picture, but this is a reason why these things just don't exist a lot of times. I know Director Byington has experience with with this same project in the Sandusky area. Very high cost. I don't have a lot of details on how it even got started or off the ground, but it was something that they tried to dig into, and they found it was just very cost prohibitive. And so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the report, all the way through up to their recommendation. And so, pending any questions, Mr. Chair, that's all I got.
Thank you, Assistant Director Boston. I know Councilperson Hamilton Steiner wanted to see this report, and I think, one of the things, and I'm sure other people have questions or comments, is that, the public has asked a lot about this, so I'm glad that we're having a committee hearing. We can refer folks to the report. Hopefully we can make it available on the planning website, or some way it can be available to folks, so we can refer them rather than sending them a PDF, but sending them a link so they can look at it. City paid for it. It's our work product. I do think, though, that, my mind goes to my day job, goes to the water taxi that we operate. You need an external funder. In that instance, I think we have a sponsor that pays for it, so that pays for the operations. We got a grant for the capital. And so you would need to have a partner, I think, to make this work, because cost is the issue. I do think that something like the school could be a good partner if they wanted to, right? But I think that would have to be a concentric circle of need and want between the school district and the city. Has that conversation even, I guess one question is, has that conversation even occurred? I know, for example, RTA, you go to Cleveland State, you used to automatically get a bus pass. So there's kind of a student fee element to your registration, and then CSU paid RTA, and that was kind of a funding model. Lakewood doesn't have buses. Less likely for elementary school kids, although we'll see what happens in the coming months here. But certainly for middle school kids and high school kids, it's relevant. You can live near Blackbird and go to Lakewood High School, and your parent can leave for work really early, and you got to figure out to get to school. That was me. I just got rides, but it would have been way easier had there been a dedicated way to do it. Although RTA already runs there, right? So is there some kind of too much? I guess, and so first, has there been any discussion between the schools and the city about this? Second, what were the nature of the discussions with RTA? Because I tend to agree that it would have to be, they're the experts in the field. And do they have any appetite to do any of this? Or was it kind of, we have our own funding problems, this is not something we do anymore?
I think we did not have any discussions with the school, and so I can't speak to the appetite they might have in terms of that, like cost sharing or something. I know they have their own issues coming up, and we did not interact directly with RTA. Iteris did on our behalf to get data, so I really don't know RTA's appetite. I think you probably read in some of their annual reports the struggles that they have in trying to maintain services that they're not looking to expand. And I think that going back to that survey, I think ultimately what won out was frequency over reach. Because it's just the consistency of service was something that they tried to uphold rather than trying to go to new locations with any new services. And so that's something that they struggle with as well. So it's a sticky problem. And it's good to have the study. But yeah, any direction you go, it's not a moneymaker, but it's just a public good. That if you make the decision to provide it, having that external funding sources obviously will help, but it's a lot.
Yeah, I think like sponsorship Right, but I think you'd have to have someone, I mean, you're talking millions of dollars, not just, here's $100 or here's $1,000. So that's a challenge. Open up to my colleagues who may have questions. Councilperson Hamilton Steiner.
So, how would we get that data from back when we did have the community circulator? Because you said that we were one of the last communities to have the community circulator go, and we were still having very high usage. So, I would like to dig into that data and see that. And I know it was when we had more higher population and all of that stuff, but I would like to see that data. And the other thing is, looking back on one of the slides you had, there was like the Uber ride share, those usage. I wonder if how many of those numbers could be converted to whatever transportation that, if it's on demand or whatever, how many of those riders would use a service like this versus the Uber rideshare? Because even going within Lakewood, that can get pretty expensive. If you're trying to just go to the grocery store, or you don't want to drive to one of the restaurants or, one of the other bars you might be going to, it can be expensive just within Lakewood. So $1.25 or whatever it would end up being to hop safely and go somewhere seems like a better deal than ordering an Uber or some other ride share. So I don't know if that was talked about at all by the consultant, how many of those people could potentially be converted into riders. And then the last point, I think, of course, this isn't a moneymaker. We are a government and we're not in the business to make money, but yet we do have to be responsible. And so I think it does become a talking point and a discussion that this is something that comes up a lot in the community. And so what is the appetite that the community has, that they're willing? And if they look at the numbers, and is this something that they would be willing to say, this is how I want our tax dollars to be spent, because there is a public benefit and a public good to this. And there's all these other factors that we might not necessarily be able to quantify to it to where we're making a profit.
So to answer your first point, I don't know if we could get data. I don't know if iTerra's was able to get circulated data.
Okay.
I remember there was some back and forth and
Yeah.
resistance on that. And just for context, and again, I didn't live here in Lakewood at the time, but just in doing the basic research, the Lakewood Circulator was the most used out of all of the community circulators, but it still lost money. I think that's the unfortunately the overarching point, or just the kind of the facts behind it. Rideshare conversions we did not talk about in there, and I just don't know and kind of going to dovetail into your third point in terms of the public desire versus the service. I don't know if just the perception of sheer convenience, if you would be able to convert people from an Uber's going to be here in 10 minutes or 15 minutes versus I have to make a reservation in 2 hours, or I have to walk to the top of the block and wait 20 minutes. Because if you're trying to square kind of that circle on public opinion, I think public opinion from that survey, if that means anything, from a self-selected survey of 550 people, is that 80% of people would prefer a fixed route service, vice what we have right now with STC, and so that's weighing that it's one of the higher costs, but you get the benefits of predictability. You know where the stops are. That, I think, goes a long way with folks. Vice like what do you mean? I have to use my phone. I have to ask for it 2 hours in advance. It's just I think people, when they think of public transit, and the expectations are they want to walk to a fixed location and go to another fixed location.
And it would be interesting, because I think as we talk about Lakewood and being walkable and a walkable community, there are people that might want to use their cars less, but walking is a little bit more of a challenge for them, or maybe it's a longer distance, or if you want to encourage, our middle school and high school kids to, get out there and walk more, and, and biking, if we want to have a culture that relies less on cars in our community, I think we need to open up and have more options available for folks. That makes sense. And I think that's a public conversation that we need to have and say, okay, what are those costs that you're willing to bear and that you want us as a government entity to bear to have this type of community that has all of these things and has this culture where we are not as reliant on our motor vehicles to get around. I know growing up, I relied on walking and the RTA. That's how I got around primarily, especially as I went into middle school and high school. It was the RTA and walking. And so I think if we want to have that culture, we have to be able to support the culture appropriately.
Council President Keppel.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave, for this presentation, coming back to this after all this time. I had a couple things just, really to Councilman Hamilton Steiner's point, and, I think as we talk through this is the concept of which aspects of what we do as a municipal government should be, revenue neutral or not cost us money versus what is just a built-in thing is, sort of up for debate and really up to us. And some of that is built on systems that were not built for everybody. So just a thought of what we choose to prioritize, like, the pool never made money until it was so desirable that, it broke even to having extra, and Winterhurst, didn't make money. And so so these sorts of things, we don't make money on trash and recycling, so just what we choose to and who it benefits. And on that too is sort of the cost of the different options. There's, yes, so looking on all those on that chart is that the on-demand contracted service may be less burdensome on the finances, but it also serves a lot fewer people. So what we have right now, if we look at on page, when we're talking about our system now in the report, I think it's 15, but it talks about how our current system we have 14 that we pay senior transportation connection because most of the trips happen around the same time, and so we're at capacity. If I'm reading this rightly, we're at capacity. However, it leads to the drivers only being in the vans for 1.5 to 2 hours daily. So we have vans sitting there not being used, and so that doesn't seem very. We have vans sitting there not being used, but we have people who need transportation. I know Director Barry and I have talked about this many times because we've expanded that because for a while it was seniors only, and partly that's because of funding. We get the funding specifically for seniors or for medical transport, for non-emergency medical transport. And so then to expand to disabilities, then you have to have funding, but then you also have to make an appointment. You make an appointment 4 hours in advance, which is fine if you're going to Congregate Meals and you know what time that lunch is, but not so great if you're, a 15-year-old that's gonna go to the park and meet some friends and then hop on the bus and come home when it's getting darker. So, it costs a lot less, but we're not getting that much usage, and we probably won't, practically speaking, if we were to offer it to anybody. Anyway, just that's kind of more of an observation than something I expect you to respond to, but that it just seems like we have these resources and they're just sitting there a lot of the time. And it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way if we build a system that's not what people need and want, then they don't use it, and then we say, well, we don't want to invest more, but the system isn't what they need. So that's just, if we look at what people are saying they want, it's also worth noting, we also just, passed this active transportation plan and the ADA transition plan, and we're trying to work on increasing access in our rights of way and people to be able to get around. And so there's also, if you're walking and biking a lot more, but you want to get from, one end, to Vice President Baker's point, to the other, maybe you can hop on the circulator and then walk the last mile. So just thinking through these things, it seems like in 2011, when the pilot, ostensibly failed for usage, that doesn't necessarily mean that it would fail in 2025 with increased interest in active transportation and potentially a different model than what was done then. So these are more thoughts than questions, but I did have actually some questions, though, too. If you'll indulge. Do we have any information on the demographics of the people who took the survey?
I'd have to check with Iteris to see if they have their records, but I don't, it didn't make it in the report.
I didn't see it in the report. And then also our current provision, because it notes it was like 85% of people wanted Saturday service or something like that, was really high. Do we currently provide service on Saturdays or just Monday through Friday for the senior transportation?
I think senior transportation is only Monday through Friday because it's typically medical appointments and things like that.
Sure. Okay, and all right, I'll turn it over to other people, but I might come back for more questions.
Councilman Evans?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Assistant Director Boss. This is just a fantastic presentation. I'm glad we got to dig into these numbers. I want to just take a second for folks who are interested or folks who are listening at home for, the uphill battle we're climbing here, because this is largely a federal but mostly state funding issue that we're facing. Our neighbors to the north in Michigan, they spend up to about $50 per person for public transit per year. In Pennsylvania, they spend up to $200 per person on public transit per year. In Ohio, we spend about $10. The state just does not give a damn about public transportation. And that's part of the issue we're facing here with trying to fund something like this. Because when you don't invest in that, you have systems that don't work, they're inefficient, they don't do what you want them to, and people don't want to use them. When you invest in them, they work better, they're more frequent, they go where you want to go, and people do use them, and then they don't lose as much money. So I just wanted to put that in perspective of like the mountain where we're trying to climb. And I'm committed to doing whatever. I would love to see the circulator back, and I do think we desperately need some kind of alternative ways to get around. But I also just want everybody to understand the realities of this, and it's a culture change, not just for us, but from all the levels above us as well. But thank you for the work. Certainly appreciate it.
Councilman Bullock?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the administration. So a couple quick things. First, I do remember when we lost the circulator service, probably Assistant Director Swallow does too. That was during the time when Governor Kasich was cutting the local government funds, and RTA was hit too. And we had RTA's leadership in this room. Then Mayor Fitzgerald had a bunch of senior citizens and other residents in this room. Everybody was on the same page, expressing desire to retain the service, but the RTA director said exactly what David Boss said, which is that ridership is high, it's our most successful and best used, but it still is revenue negative. Now that said, as Councilwoman Keppel said, the pool isn't expected to be revenue positive. Probably is operationally on some summers, but still not the capital. If we had the pool passes we're going to pay for the capital rebuild, it would be more expensive than a golf, membership, or it would be on par with that. So I think you said it, Mr. Boss, that it's a public good. So the question that I think we got to bring into focus here is, what is our definition of success? So for me, probably what we're going for is the maximum number of riders. And, because you wouldn't want to go to the trouble and hassle, whatever the cost is, and have it not be used, which is exactly what the experiment was, right? So if that's how we optimize it, because what we're really trying to do is not get it close to break even, or you want to do that to the degree possible, but it's all the external benefits that you're really justifying it for. I remember, I think I mentioned in the last couple of months, I got a chance to visit for a nonprofit board I serve on, the Mahoning Valley's RTA system. It's called WRTA, Western RTA or something. I don't know why, Western Reserve RTA or something. They did away with all fares recently because half of their fare revenue was being cannibalized by the fare enforcement, the maintenance, the equipment, all of that stuff. So they just did away with it. They didn't lose that much revenue. They saw a ridership increase. That's probably what we should be conceiving of. Maybe it's not absolutely zero cost, but I noticed in the chart that the Iteris did, they had $108,000, I think it was. Maybe we could switch back to that slide, assumed across all scenarios. Maybe, you know, that's a responsible approach that they took, but maybe we should do further work on this, because I think I'm hearing that there's consensus among city council members that we are interested in trying to propose an implementable circulator in some form. And I think the study did a great job of looking at the alternatives. There's a rainbow of options. But as I recall, the study was delivered, but we didn't have a recommendation from the administration necessarily about what comes next. I think I'm hearing city council saying, let's keep working until we can get to a proposal for something that comes next. Probably that will involve a scientifically valid sample for a survey that can more precisely guide all of this. Would you agree with that statement, Mr. Boss? And, you know, additional focused analysis before incurring any cost. Certainly the financial conversation is, of course, the key one. But if we don't expect this to be a break-even service in just terms of a going concern, I don't think that's even valid in Tokyo or New York City, right? The real reason you do that is for convenience, for mode shift, for parking, all the other external benefits, I think. You agree with some of the points I'm driving at there, or am I missing anything major?
Well, I mean, the survey that was conducted here is valid in terms of responses. I don't know if we would get any different of a response.
But I mean, we opted in, right, rather than.
Yes.
So, you know, and people, I noticed that there was a restaurant that had a bunch of trips generated, but 0 volunteered in the survey, and, you know, it just is a little example of kind of quirks in our data. Mm-hmm. I guess I'd be interested. Anecdotally, some people brought up to me, without me initiating the conversation, that they thought an evening pub crawl, they called it more politely, restaurant service, would be good because it's safer, it's fun, it would work better, you know, that kind of thing. That's a target, but they were definitely a fixed route option. That was the idea, was I'm going to go out with my friends, and these were not college kids or young people that were proposing this. That I don't know that that's in our model, for example, right? So there's certain assumptions that are behind the rider. There's different ridership products, to use an overly technical term or corporate term, that we could drill down on.
I've been on the 26 bus at 11 o'clock at night, and it's a party bus. So
We've already got it in 26. Okay.
yeah.
Councilperson Hamilton Steiner.
Yep, no, I know, we're trying to wrap up here too, probably. So before we wrap up, I just want to bounce off what Councilman Bullock was saying, and what do we consider a success? I think that's something that as a council we should all think about. And maybe that's what we're building that. And I think if you go back to what the community circulator, when we had it, it was successful, I would say, because people used it. Everyone's talking about it. So there was something there that was working. And just because it didn't make the city money, I don't think that's a valid reason to get rid of something. Especially because clearly there was a public benefit. People are still talking about it after all these years. So that's my one point. But is there any data or information on that pilot program that was done in 2011? Like ridership, what was the route, who was using it, just all of that, because I think we need to look at that and see, because maybe it goes back to President Keppel's point as well, that if you create something that nobody really wants, of course it's going to fail. But if you create something that people want, you're going to have success.
Yeah, I don't have all that data. I'm sure I could try to pull it from, so some council members were here when that went down. But I do have the contract. I've got some of the basic data. I don't know if I have ridership data or how that pilot was run. It predates me by about 10 years.
I think it would be helpful to
I
have.
can definitely try to see what we have.
Thank you.
and collect.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if we had some of that. I don't know if it would help if we could even get the clerks to help out and see if they can find some, look back at some past meeting minutes and discussions and see if there's some data that we can find that way.
We also have a current patrol officer, Chris Tarr, who I went to high school with, who started the West Side Shuffle, if you remember that. He's currently a police officer in Lakewood now, but his business venture about 10 years ago was he bought a school bus, and he kind of went up and down. He's not doing it still, so it couldn't have been a great moneymaker for him, but he may have some pro tips for us, so we should reach out to him. But President Keppel.
Make us a deal on a bus.
He's got a bus, yeah.
Yeah, so just to that point too is building the systems that don't work and then people don't use them. So it's also a building system that didn't work in 2011 versus a system that works in 2025. So I'd be interested to know about that, of like, where did it go? What were the hours? That sort of stuff. And then, one way that I could see, and I don't, be further discussion would be to just get a hint of, people sometimes say they want something because they think that they want it, but they don't actually use it. But I think, we hear about it enough that it does seem like worth pursuing. Is there a way that we could do a mini pilot, perhaps with the buses that are sitting at Cove taking up parking spaces that are desperately needed there a lot of the time, that are only being used 1.5 to 2 hours a day? Like, could we do a mini pilot for a month or something, and without fees, and just be hop on, whatever, however that works. I don't know if that's even possible, but something like that, just to see if we build it, will people come? Or is it worth investing our scant staff resources and fiscal resources and investing in something? So just a thought that maybe there's a way to do a little mini test in 2025 to see if it's something that people are serious about wanting to bring back, and are they serious about prioritizing that over other budget priorities?
Great. Well, I think that certainly we have our council retreat on Friday, so I think this is a ripe discussion topic. I think capital expense is one thing, operating expense is another thing. So how do you get the bus? How do you get the capital? And then how do you operate it? And I do think there are models out there. Lakewood doesn't fit nicely into models. If we talked about often, we're very dense. So I think it's worthy of discussion and collaboration with the administration. So thank you, Assistant Director Boss, for putting this together. Thanks, Commissioner Parmley, for sticking around. Thanks. Yeah. I should have allowed you to leave. I'm sorry. So either way, Charlotte's been a good sport in the back too. So thank you. If there are no objections, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
See you.